before I begin, I'd like to thank a few people who made this paper possible. First, I'd like to thank my family, specifically my mom, for always supporting me and cultivating my love of books. Without you, this paper wouldn't exist. I'd also like to thank my mentor, Mr. Eric Moss, for his wisdom and knowledge on this topic. Who better to help me write a thesis on literature than someone who loves writing in literature? Finally, I would like to thank Mrs. Lambert, whose continual interest and investment in my work has inspired and excited my interest in nonfiction writing. Your kind words and incredible guidance has made this project my favorite throughout my years at SCCS. Thank you so much for everything you have given and continue to give me. Think about the last time you went into a bookstore. Maybe it was a week ago, a month ago, maybe just yesterday. As you make your way through to find a new novel you've been dying to read, you pass an interesting section of books. As seen on Book Talk and #SpicyTalk are the headings for a large section popularized primarily for their mature content. You shake your head, not a fan of the oversaturated titles that online readers seem to be obsessed with. When you arrive at your intended section, you pick up your book to buy and leave the store, ready to dive into your new story. You end up finishing the book in a week. As you close the book for the last time, you're left feeling a bit bummed. It wasn't a bad book, it just felt a little off. The characters felt unoriginal, the plot was a bit unbelievable, and, to be honest, the ending left you feeling unsatisfied. As you scan over the other books on your bookshelf, you're left thinking about recent literature in America. Repetitive plot devices, thousands of sex-filled novels, and general disappointment seem to be the common occurrences throughout the books of the last 10 years. All of this reflecting has left you with one overwhelming question. What has happened to modern literature? The most prominent writing style of the last 300 years is the novel, and today, millions of novels are available for us to read, whether we want the classic literary fiction from centuries past or the newer genre fictions of mystery, fantasy, science fiction, and more. Yet, in a world full of books, America seems to be barely reading. According to the National Endowment for the Arts, in 2022, only about 53% of American adults said they read a book at least once in a 12-month period, and of those adults, only 37.6% read novels or short stories. The rise of technology is a big contributor to these small numbers, and while many young readers are now using the internet to promote reading, many people seem to be only critiquing these online communities, specifically those on Book Talk, a subgenre of TikTok that focuses on books, book reviews, and book-related organization. A new discourse is on the rise on the internet and in the literary world, the most intriguing take on the Book Talk issue stemming from one direct question. Has modern literature been affected by anti-intellectualism? The term anti-intellectualism is defined by Richard Hofstadter in his best-selling book, Anti-Intellectualism in American Life, in which he describes it as, quote, a resentment and suspicion of the life of the mind and of those who are considered to represent it, and a disposition constantly to minimize the value of that life, end quote. This debate on whether modern literature has become anti-intellectual may seem like a silly dispute online. How could one call literature anti-intellectual? The reality is that these accusations aren't overly dramatic. The state of modern literature is undesirable at best and a fatal flaw in the character of our country at worst. Today, I am not just arguing that modern literature has changed and you should care. I am here to inform, as much as I am to warn, about a much larger issue than subjective opinions on books. With this decline in reading and the effect of social media, literature is in a troubling state, corrupted by greed, hedonism, and ignorance. Modern literature reflects our culture's anti-intellectualism, and we need God to combat the negative direction the United States has taken. From the starting process of many modern novels, it's clear that modern literature has been corrupted by greed. This is first seen in the publishing industry. Despite once being made up of small, family-owned businesses, publishing expanded in size to major corporations in the 1960s. With this, their focus also shifted from producing high-quality literature to pursuing books that could give them the most revenue. In the modern world of publishing, publishers seem to only pursue the next potential bestseller, turning literature into just another business venture to exploit. Next, the greed of authors has resulted in a wave of unoriginality throughout various literary genres. The community on TikTok, called Book Talk, has popularized what is known as tropes, or reoccurring ideas and themes in books, such as enemies to lovers or ice hockey romance. Many modern readers often choose what to read based on these tropes. This has led to authors using these tropes to market their books, many blatantly copying other successful authors. One example of this is with the author Sarah J. Maas. Primarily known for her adult fantasy series, A Court of Thorns and Roses, Maas has found great success and popularity by combining classic fantasy and romance elements. In recent years, with the help of TikTok, Maas's work has become a sort of rubric or how-to guide for new authors to become just as successful. A new subgenre of fantasy, called romantasy, the blending of the fantasy and romance genres, has become a buzzword in almost every modern fantasy novel of the last several years, all thanks to Maas's successful series. The booming romantasy market is just one example of the copy and paste style of modern literature, resulting in thousands of recurring stories that feel oversaturated and unoriginal. Business has become the all-consuming focus of the average American and is often seen as the most important part of life, transforming that life into one all about money or success. When the pursuit of money overcomes the pursuits of the mind, it is impossible for a culture to not be infected with a rejection of intellect at its very core. However, greed is not the only thing that has negatively affected modern literature and culture. Over the last several years, literature has been corrupted by hedonism, which is the pursuit of pleasure and self-indulgence in its consumers and within the pages of its books. Thanks to the popularity of the romance genre, many Americans now not only consume, but encourage the use of excess graphic sexual content in books. The community of Book Talk has become, yet again, the source of our issue. The hashtags #SmutTalk and #SteamyBooks have received billions of views on TikTok, promoting hundreds of smut-filled books to its hungry viewers. As the attention on these novels has grown, the intensity has increased, producing a newer, more graphic subgenre called dark romance. The dark romance genre has been distinguished by its use of overly sexually immoral themes and tropes, like BDSM, the romanticization of murder, stalking, and kidnapping, and even the horrifying use of non-consensual sex between the main characters. In an obvious display of hedonism, much of the romance genre expresses anti-biblical and anti-intellectual qualities which mirror those prevalent in modern American culture. All throughout Scripture, we are called to flee from sexual immorality and to not give into our earthly desires, because they give birth to sin. In modern America, we see the opposite occurring. We have become a culture all about indulgence in doing what makes the individual happy or feel good, a sentiment that invades a lot of modern adult fiction. In this, Americans have become no better than the animals who also only concern themselves with pleasure or pain. Despite the issues of greed and hedonism, the most concerning dilemma with modern literature that confirms our culture's anti-intellectual qualities comes from the crisis regarding the purpose of the contemporary novel, one that proves modern literature has been corrupted by ignorance. This is first seen through the loss of spirituality in literature. Joseph Bodum, in his book, The Decline of the Novel, claims that the novel was an inherently Christian art form. It was the art form of the Protestant West, and it effectively spread Christian morality to those even outside the faith. Every novel had Christian principles throughout the story, whether it displayed biblical concepts like mercy in the Count of Monte Cristo, or showed characters persevering through shame and guilt, like Hester Prynne in The Scarlet Letter. Our literature, at its core, is a reflection of the Christian's spiritual and physical journey through life, full of trials and redemption and growth, because our lives are one of the many stories that God has written for his glory. However, in today's world, it doesn't take many pages when reading the majority of modern literature to pinpoint its absence of Christian values, especially among the most popular novels. Without Christian standards for our morals, It's not difficult to categorize modern novels as, at best, being completely pointless, and at worst, incredibly immoral. Throughout this paper, we've seen these struggles of modern literature, but we've never addressed why these are problems in the first place. The crux of this literary dilemma is that literature in its current state is lost. It has lost its purpose. Our literature was created to help answer our questions regarding our existence or our purpose. Authors wrote to try to guide their generations away from spiritual apathy. They looked towards the future, hoping that their writing would guide and inspire those who were lost or confused. They wanted to show people how to live in their current troubling times, maintaining those important Christian beliefs, even as their world evolved around them. However, in our heavily secularized world, few authors seem to write for these higher causes. No longer do we hear of great authors who attempt to criticize a nation's sins, authors who want to make the world a better place for future generations. America has lost its purpose, and though it hungers for the metaphysical, for a sense of existence and understanding, it casts aside its source of an answer, Christianity and the one true God, de-emphasizing the centuries-old vessel once used to express said problems and solutions, our literature. One of the biggest arguments against this thesis concerns the purpose of literature. Many people would argue that, as an art, it does not hold any responsibility to promote moral values or serve as an attempt at ethical and cultural improvement. That would only add an unnecessary burden to the art form. Why should we try to change the world with literature? John Sutherland, a professor of modern English literature, uses his book, A Little History of Literature, to show us that it's always had a greater purpose than just telling a story. He explores the motivations of authors throughout time as they wrote their famous books, proving that literature has impacted millions, changing lives, and shaping nations. Those who think literature cannot or should not seek the betterment of mankind in some way have seldom read a book from before the 1980s. They completely miss the point of art as a whole and fail to see literature's effect on the nations of the past. Literature, without the purpose of furtherance, is nothing more than nonsense words on printer paper. By traversing through the many facets of modern literature, from the publishing industry down to the purpose of the novel and its modern content, modern literature has proven our culture's anti-intellectualism, observing its greed, its hedonism, and finally, its ignorance. The ability to read and write is an incredible gift from God. Through our writing, we are able to express our deepest thoughts and emotions, giving readers and ourselves a look into the complex facets of humanity. In modern America, that precious skill is being abused and actively destroyed. Literature has become a vessel for selfish advancement and indulgence, its original use nearly forgotten. American culture is anti-intellectual, not just because it's ruined literary intellect with avarice, but because it has become anti-God in its rejection of those important foundational beliefs and virtues once highly valued in our country. So what does that mean for us? What can we do about a morally struggling art form and culture? For starters, I encourage you to read more. Remind the world and yourselves of the importance of literature, learning from the wisdom and the mistakes of those who have come before us. Those of you who read regularly should be careful with the books you pick up, so that you might not fall into temptation or indulge in fleshly desires, especially when consuming modern literature. Finally, I urge everyone to not stand idly by while our way of life is transformed into a godless one. Produce entertainment built on a foundation of God, so that we might glorify Him through it. Teach others of the importance of intellect and higher thought, so that we might create a future full of hope and wisdom through the omnipotence of our God. Our world is broken, yes, but that doesn't mean it's impossible to change. Literature is a beautiful, essential part of life. Our world wouldn't be where it is today if not for the writers who paved the way for us. It's easy to dismiss its current condition, to ignore the issues of our sinful world, and live for ourselves. However, I fervently request other believers to fight for a better future, a brighter tomorrow, not just for ourselves, but for those who come after us. Thank you.
All right, and so now again we will spend 10 minutes in question and answer period to just further explore this topic with Joseph. So, would someone like to start us out with a question? Yes, Lucy.
Are there any modern authors or series that you would recommend for like that do enter those principles that you're talking about that good literature needs?
That's a good question. I've read a lot of modern literature trying to seek it, and the majority of it is pretty bad. I'll be quite frank with you. I'm still kind of on the search for a good series, but I know there has to be something out there. So sorry.
That's all right. Yes, Abigail.
How would you encourage someone who really loves to write but is having a hard time being creative in their writing?
For like the purpose of creating more of a fiction story, or just
Any story, just
okay. Well, I mean, drawing from the past examples of authors and seeing what they wrote and why they wrote, I feel like the purpose of writing is a big part of why you're writing. I emphasize that quite a bit. And so I would kind of just think about why you want to write and pray over it and read good sources and examples, and that'll really shape a story if you're meant to write that thing.
Yes, Kaylin.
Would you say that as Christians we should not only just stay away from the hypersexualized and like really dark parts of literature nowadays, but also looking for more of but instead of that, looking for more of a Christian viewpoint, or are we okay to just settle for that not super dark, if that makes sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. I think ideally it would be good to try to find Christian authors and research authors and see what their beliefs are before diving into a story, because it's really hard to tell from just the cover or the back of the book to know what it's about, and sometimes it's kind of a trial and error thing. I know I've read books where I was expecting it to be a good story and it thoroughly disappointed on the morality presented in it. So.
Good. Benjamin.
In your research or just in your own personal experience, when would you say that the decline of literature really started to happen? And do you have any idea why, or like what was the inspiration for that?
Yeah, so I think the first big cultural movement we see in this decline of literature resulted after World War I and World War II, and we see generations who felt pretty discouraged after that. And in one of the books I read, he heavily relates the decline in literature to the decline of church attendance. And so we see this huge correlation in the 50s and 60s and kind of up to present day where the attendance of a lot of different denominations has declined. And we see that with that declining thing, we see that in our literature and what they write for and how they write. So.
Viva.
So, as someone who is constantly busy with sports and school, I don't have time to read a lot. So what would you say is like something that can almost take the place of like reading and being able to get that intellectualism back?
I would say, well, I don't believe that no one has time to read. I think I understand busyness, and I'm not saying you have to read 30, 40, 50 books a year. I think 2 books a year is just fine, and I think a lot of our time is taken over by, sure, sports and school, but think about when you get home from a long day, what are you doing? Are you doing work, or are you going on your phone? Are you watching TV? And I would say, really, to get that intellectualism back, we do need to be reading. And whether that's reading fiction stories or nonfiction, we're not going to get that same level of information from like just TV or really any other form, I would say.
Welcome.
Do you think the cultural decline and the decline of literary quality are causes of each other?
As in, like, they relate to each other?
Yeah. Do you think culture's decline has made authors try to write worse books, and authors writing worse books has made culture decline? Do you think it's kind of like a cycle?
Yeah, I would say so. Again, it starts with that decline in church and beliefs, and then so that leads to people being born in not Christian environments, whether they, in the past, whether they actually accepted those beliefs or not. We found that a lot of people and authors, even if they weren't practicing Christians, they still held a lot of those same beliefs. So as we see a decline in that, we see a decline in what we should be okay with, and as this rise in sexual content and maybe intense violent content or just poor morals has increased, of course that writing is going to reflect that. And so it is kind of just this endless cycle because it's encouraging. Yeah.
So I've talked to some women, some Christian women who read those, not dark, books, but they are the hyper-sexualized books, and they always seem to have the same excuses of, it's just a book, or I skip over those parts. What would you say to those girls and those women who are reading those books as Christians, and they do feel that it's okay because it's just a book, or they skip over the parts?
I would say the use of graphic sexual content in any form of media should not be present, and especially as Christians, it is a form of pornography, I would say, and it can become just as addicting as watching actual visual content. And so I would just kind of try to point them towards scripture like that, because the problem is it is typically very graphic, and so it's not just a brief mention. It is I'd say as bad as watching porn. So
Isaac.
For a beginner reader, what would you say would be like the best genre to start on?
I mean, it's good to start with the classics, but if you aren't accustomed to just reading a normal realistic fiction book, I would recommend some older authors that are maybe more in those beliefs. If you like mystery, read Agatha Christie. Those are pretty easy to understand, and those typically have pretty good stories. Obviously, kind of the starter of the fantasy genre, J.R.R. Tolkien, those are typically good books to start with, and it kind of just depends on a person's personal interests, but I'd always be willing to help if you need guidance in that area. So.
Good. All right. Yes, Mr. Claro.
So you criticize the use of tropes in a lot of modern literature. Say one of your classmates here wants to go write the next great fantasy novel. Are you encouraging them to avoid tropes and archetypes altogether, or just the bad ones? And then what ones, if so, would you want to include in your next great book?
Yeah. So tropes in themselves are not inherently bad, and I mean, a lot of books have tropes because there have to be some sort of recurring ideas. You could even say a redemption arc is a recurring trope. The problem is people using it just because it's popular or it gains a lot of attention. And that's the biggest problem, is we see a lot of, again, this copy and paste style of almost every fantasy book that's written by a woman, and that's of the adult audience that I've seen and looked at to see what it's about. All of them are marketed as enemies to lovers, and just these really oversimplification and overused things. So I would encourage that person to try to be original and not just go with the flow.
Mr. Ross.
So there has been a bit of a renewed interest in reading in the last few years. You can attribute that to a few things. One of them is the romantic genre, which is the most successful right now and accounts for most of book sales currently. Also, there's a panic among young adults with the overuse of screens, and so they're wanting to return back to reading. Barnes & Noble, which was about to go bankrupt in around 2020, opened 60 new stores last year. So how can Christians ride this kind of rotten tide of romantasy and similar genres and take advantage of this rekindled interest in reading?
What do you mean by take advantage of?
Now that people are returning to books, right? But they're reading primarily romantasy and similar genres. Is there a way that Christians can take back and right the ship of literature now that people have returned to reading and are worried about just staring at their phones all the time?
Yeah, well, I guess we can do that by writing our own stories that can still be marketed as fantasy, but trying to make them different. I mean, at different levels. As readers and consumers, we can see other people reading those and maybe try to encourage them away from other things. those who want to write, again, should write things. And even in the business world, trying to encourage the use of more, having it not just be one kind of genre or focusing on what will give them the most money. But yeah, so in many aspects, we can try to take it back from, again, the publishing industry down to the books themselves. So.
Deacon.
If I were to say that I want to avoid any risks of the dark side of literature or
Yeah,
whatever,
sure.
so I just want to only read the Bible, only write about Christianity or whatever, and only read things that are about Christianity and stuff like that. Would you say there's fault in that, or?
I would say that God has given us the ability to use our intellect and our talent to write good books, and I don't go into this a lot, but the purpose of the novel was to try to teach the Christians, the Protestants of the day, how to live in their world. And so a lot of them address topics like sin and temptation and, again, concepts like mercy or revenge. And so what you'll see is that a lot of these books were very Christian, and I think it's a great way for you and for others to read other people's, even fictional people's experiences through things that we constantly go through. And so, of course, we should be reading our Bible, and reading books about Christianity are good, but that would be kind of ignoring this beautiful gift and art that God has given us to help minister or help Christians in a more current way, I'd say.
Good. Yes, Abby?
What is your opinion on audiobooks? Like, it's such a big thing in the book world of audiobooks are reading books or just physical books only, so what is your opinion?
Personally, I don't listen to audiobooks because I prefer physical books. I don't think there is anything inherently wrong with an audiobook, but you can't have it just completely dominate. The part of reading that is so incredible is that it's challenging your mind to look at words and decipher their meaning and then take in their meaning. In my opinion, it's less intellectually stemming to just listen to someone talk. And while you can get certain similar messages, I think it's the actual reading that you can really slow down and notice all of these beautiful subtexts. So.
Yes, all right. Yes.
Do you think there was like a golden age of literature and why?
I do. I wrote my 9th grade mini thesis was actually about that. So I would say the Victorian area, so kind of that 19th century, that was when a lot of great works of literature were produced, and a lot of those authors were focused on trying to make the world a better place. We see people like Charles Dickens and Oliver Twist